Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is still Victor Shi. It is Thursday, February 2nd, 2023. And today we have an Ask Me Anything series. So if you have any questions for me, we already have people who have been kind enough and submitted their questions to me via email or on Twitter. You can leave them in the comment section on YouTube, and we'll be sure to get to them today. But I first want to get into some of the news of the week because we've seen some really interesting news of the week and news of the day, really. First off, we have some new committee assignments. So I know on this show we've talked a lot about what Kevin McCarthy has done to committees, but I want to focus on what Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, has done to the committees. And it's a great counteroffensive to Republicans right now. So yesterday, as all of us may know, the Republicans formed this subcommittee called the Weaponization of Government Subcommittee. It's chaired by Jim Jordan. It's going to focus on things like investigating Democrats, investigating President Biden. And so what Hakeem Jeffries did yesterday was he announced that Stacey Plaskett, who you might remember as the House impeachment manager during the second impeachment of Donald Trump, it still kind of boggles my mind that we had two impeachments of a sitting president. But Stacey Plaskett, she walked into the second impeachment with this really kind of superwoman-like outfit, and she did a phenomenal job. She did a phenomenal presentation tracking where the rioters were on January 6th, and she was so compelling, so great, has this calmness about her, but this kind of precision to her that is really amazing. So she's going to be the ranking member on the subcommittee on weaponization of government. And so she's going to go head to head with Jim Jordan. And I think that's going to be a great spectacle to see, a great show to see. I think Stacey Plaskett knows her stuff really, really well. She has a law degree. She was actually Jamie Raskin's former student. And so I think she's in great hands. And another person who's going to be on that subcommittee called the Weaponization of Government Subcommittee is Dan Goldman. He was the former lead prosecutor for the first impeachment of Donald Trump. He was up on the dais questioning witnesses like Fiona Hill, Alex Vindman, all people who are such heroes to democracy. And he is a relentless prosecutor, really has this reputation. Used to work at the Southern District of New York, which is often called the Sovereign District of New York because it is notoriously known for being separate from the Department of Justice and really using hardball prosecutorial techniques to question witnesses. And so both Dan Goldman and Stacey Plaskett will now be serving on that subcommittee of weaponization of government subcommittee. And so they're going to be going up against Jim Jordan. They're going to be going up against people on the Republican side who are so intent on really just making a fool out of what's happening in Congress and launching these truly baseless investigations. Yesterday, I mentioned that already we have Andy Biggs out of Arizona, who's this Republican election denier, who said that he's going to investigate the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. And so you're seeing investigations and impeachment articles already being ginned up. And it's, again, out of no basis and no facts, but it's why we need Democrats to push back against this. And I think it's a great contrast to see what Kevin McCarthy is doing and what Hakeem Jeffries is doing. Hakeem Jeffries is really pumping out new blood, fresh voices onto these new committees, and people like Maxwell Frost as the first Gen Zer on the Oversight Committee, people like Summer Lee as a new Congress person who's going to be on the Oversight Committee as well. And so you have these great candidates, these great elected officials who are going to be on these committees. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the vice-ranking member, as the second most powerful member on the House Oversight Committee. So it's these great assignments, I think, that will really be essential in countering the narratives, the harmful narratives that Republicans are pushing. One other thing that I have for you is that Ron Klain yesterday gave his exit speech from the White House as chief of staff. He was someone we've talked about a few times on the show, someone who really united the White House, who built this historic administration, and I think got a lot of the things passed. He was with President Biden since pretty much the beginning. During his time in the Senate, really helped him steer the Senate, went with him to the White House during his time as the vice president, and then now as the chief of staff to President Biden. And he's going to be outgoing next week, right after the State of the Union, and with the new incoming chief of staff, Jeff Zients. And so we're seeing some great movement on that end with Jeff Zients becoming the new chief of staff. But it was just a really special moment for Ron Klain. He made a joke that basically for the next 2 years, he's going to be the one walking the dog instead of his wife and his children, because it's his responsibility now. And it was just such a great speech and something that I think our entire nation can be grateful for his lifelong commitment to public service. And we know whatever happens next, it's going to be great. And it's going to be just really wonderful. So that is all the news that has happened today. I want to get to some of your questions that you have submitted. Again, if you want to ask me a question, be sure to ask them in the chat box, and we'll display them on our screen. But the first question we have is um, from Tina in Denver, Colorado, and she asks, "Should we care about classified documents? There are way bigger legal and moral issues facing Donald Trump and our other politicians. Would it be better to focus on those?" And she adds, "P.S. In a democracy, don't we have a right to know what's going on? It seems like everything is classified." I think, I understand your sentiment, Tina. I think that there are many other bigger legal and moral issues facing the country, facing Donald Trump. But I think it's important to keep this classified documents debate in context. This is a really big national security issue. What Donald Trump has done, and we know this is different in nature from both in nature and in volume from what happened to President Biden, as well as what happened to former Vice President Mike Pence, in the sense that he took hundreds of documents away from the White House. And not only did he fail to return them in the proper way, but he also obstructed justice by failing to return them in a fashion that was that kept up with law enforcement. And so there's that element of it, but there's also an element of it in terms of the content that he took. He took things that were related to our national security that really kind of struck at the core of our secrets as a country, things like nuclear weapons, things like foreign intelligence. Those are things that really put our country at risk. And I think it's important because, classified documents are often something that is treated with the utmost care, with the utmost integrity. I had the opportunity to be at the White House over the summer, and one of the things that I remember clearly was classified documents. You would have to put them in really big folders, and you couldn't bring them across without permission. And it was something that you treated with every person at the White House, from the low level to the higher ups, knows that classified documents are really important. They can really spill over if they're treated the wrong way. They can get into the hands of wrong people, and then those wrong people can have access to our nation's most classified and secretive information. And so I think it's a really concerning thing what Donald Trump has done. And it's more the fact that this is a pattern of Donald Trump. He obstructs justice like he breathes. He lies about these things. And I think it's really past time for him to be held accountable. And this is sure one avenue of accountability. There are also other avenues of accountability in terms of what's happening in Georgia. Fannie Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney, said that charges will be imminent. And so hopefully that will come. There's the January 6th investigations looking into his role in propagating this big lie and then ginning up his audience to go to the Capitol and fight like hell and basically put his vice president in harm's way and other elected officials who didn't agree with him. And so you have these things, you have these numerous legal investigations facing Donald Trump. And I think it's just another indication that Donald Trump is someone who just doesn't respect the law, doesn't respect processes, doesn't respect how institutions work. And now we're in the situation where, Jack Smith has to really answer the call for accountability, and he has to hold Donald Trump accountable. And like I said at the beginning, I think there are bigger legal and moral issues facing Donald Trump, but this is really important. And I think we can't overlook how important this is for our national security, for our democracy, just for how our government is supposed to function. And so I really hope that Donald Trump gets held accountable in these coming days. And Mar-a-Lago is one of those cases where it's a pretty clear and cut case. Donald Trump took documents with him from the White House and failed to return it in a proper fashion, and therefore he obstructed justice. And so I think it's this willful retention of documents. And earlier we had on Hugo Lowell this week, who talked about just how serious this is. And so, I really hope that this is going to go forward in a fast and judicious way. And to get to Tina's last point, don't we have a right to know what's going on? I think we do have a right to know what's going on. That's why the National Archives is now asking former presidents and former elected officials to check whether or not they have documents. Because at this question, the question isn't who doesn't have classified documents. It's who does have classified documents. I mean, you have so many people now, from Mike Pence to Joe Biden to Donald Trump, who have possessed classified documents, and I think it's time for them to return it in a judicious way. And I think it's time for Congress also to look at avenues for reform, because clearly, if the laws worked as they were supposed to, all presidents would return classified documents within that time frame. So I hope that Congress takes action as well. Next, we have Justin from Los Angeles, California, who asks a great question about policing. He asks, policing is out of control, but so is crime. Should our main focus be gun legislation or criminal justice reform? It seems like there's little progress on either. First off, you're exactly right. It's a uniquely American problem. There's lack of legislation on both criminal justice reform as well as gun legislation. But I want to say, when we're talking about policing in terms of what happened maybe with Tyree Nichols, I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but that isn't a question of gun reform. That's a question of police reform. That's a question of whether or not we can make our policing system a better place. And I think it's important to focus on the issues here and how we can reform police departments. Brittany Packnett Cunningham joined me earlier this week, and she reminded us of a quote by James Baldwin of how much longer do we have to wait for your progress? We've tried things like putting on body cameras. We've tried things like hiring more diverse staff in police departments. We've tried things like putting more training in police departments, investing millions on that, but it hasn't worked. And so now what is the next step? I think we have to look at, by we, I mean Congress has to look at criminal justice reform. There has to be the George Floyd and Policing and Justice Act that's instituted in both the House and the Senate. I think it has great provisions that wouldn't eliminate this problem in its entirety, but would at least dramatically reduce police brutality and violence. Because right now it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And people are being put at harm's way because of this culture that is within police institutions. And any good cop would tell you that the biggest threat to police departments are bad cops. And so bad cops right now are really, I think, posing a threat to what police can do, the benefits of police. And so I think now what the George Floyd and Police and Justice Act would do is it would end qualified immunity. It would create a national registry system where you could track bad officers, where you could basically say, if you have a couple of bad officers, it's not you move them to the next police department. It's you get rid of them in their entirety. And this is part of the way that we build from the ground up this new culture, this new route that can give people a better sense of security for police, and investing more in things like mental health services, investing things in psychologists and social workers. Maybe they're the first line of defense instead of police officers. Sometimes these violent escalations don't require someone like police to deal with them. Sometimes it requires someone who actually knows how to deal with people and who can really kind of relate to people on an individual level. And that's the job of a social worker or a psychologist. And so there are numerous ways that we can address criminal justice reform. I think there's also prison reform that's important to consider. But I think there's also gun legislation too. You look at what's happening across the country with gun violence, and it's totally out of control. And like you said, there's little progress on that as well. You have Congress failing to act on passing meaningful, bold gun reform legislation. We still have things like bump stocks, which allow high capacity weapons to fire at a speed faster than they should. You have very few national background checks compared to other countries. It's really an embarrassment. And so I think on both of those issues, we need to get our ball rolling. And us as voters, we have the ability to make a difference too. On the federal level, we have to call our elected officials. We have to really make them know that this is what we want as people. We want a fair and just and equitable society where people aren't gunned down because of the skin color that they possess, where people aren't gunned down because they go to church or they go to the grocery store, because they go to different venues or they go to a concert. I mean, these are things that we all should unite behind, and we can all unite behind by calling our elected officials, making sure that we make our voices heard, and then voting, right? 2024 isn't that far off. And if our elected officials aren't acting on the things that matter, then we have a direct stake in this election. We can vote them out of office come 2024. So I think, voting is the best option, but so is calling our elected officials, having those conversations with each other, and then also going to the state and local level, making sure that our states and local municipalities and governments have a role in instituting these changes in our lives. So next we have a question from Renee in Seattle, Washington, who asks, George Santos is at best a joke and at worst a pathological global criminal. That is true. And she says, I'm leaning toward the latter, but isn't it good to keep it in the showcase, keeping him in to showcase the insanity of the right and how our politics isn't as honest as it needs to be? I'll be honest, I think it gives me a lot of joy to look at what's happening with George Santos. I think it's a really great indication of where this Republican Party is right now in the House as well as the Senate. You have people who are totally comfortable with lying to their voters. But while I do feel, it was kind of like Kevin McCarthy during those 15 rounds of voting. I wanted it to continue, but I also knew that it's bad for our democracy to have someone like George Santos in office. I think the moral kind of stance that I want to take is I don't think George Santos should be in the public eye anymore. I think we have to hold these people accountable. While it does bring me joy to see the latest lie that George Santos tells, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. He normalizes lying in the Republican Party, and accountability has to be the first line of defense. We have to make sure that these things are not normalized, that we do not accept people who lie about their resume and their background. And I think, no matter what, people already see the insanity within the Republican Party. You have people like Kevin McCarthy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, who already are showcasing the true extremism of this Republican Party. I think George Santos should leave Congress. I don't think him being there does any good, especially now with him recusing himself from committees. I don't know if he's doing any substantial work. So there is, I think, this argument, I think, yes, to be made. Will it be better politically for Democrats to keep in office? Sure, it might, just kind of be an easy target, but for democracy in the long run, we cannot have these elected officials in Congress, because if he doesn't get kicked out, then people are basically endorsing the idea that lying is okay, and we cannot allow lying to be okay. I have time for one more, and this is one from, let's see, Crystal from Portland, Oregon, and she asks, approval ratings never go up, and one institution after another seems like it needs to start from scratch. Are there any institutions in politics and government that we can trust? How can trust be restored? This is something I think about a lot during my free time. I know it's like a bit of a nerdy thing to think about, but there are very few institutions now that have trust. You think about the Supreme Court. Historically, the Supreme Court is the type of institution that maintains the most trust, because you have justices who are appointed by both Democrats and Republicans who try to follow the law as it should be. It's a process-driven institution. It's one that shows us their work, shows us their decisions. And while we may not agree with them, at least historically, we've had respect for justices and their legal process. We've found that it's truly independent institution. But recently, the Supreme Court has been hijacked by the right. You've had Donald Trump and other Republicans basically install these justices who want to overturn rights. And the latest indication of that was Roe v. Wade. They overturned this 50-year-long precedent in the snap of a finger. And so it's a really concerning thing. I think the Supreme Court is losing trust fast. Congress is also losing trust, because you have Republicans now in control of the House, basically showing they aren't committed to actually delivering for the American people. And so that leaves us with the executive branch. President Biden, I think, is doing the best he can. Is it where he needs to be? Is it where he wants to be? Probably not, but at least he's trying to do his best to serve the American people. And I'm a bit biased here, but I've seen the amazing work that goes on in the White House. They have amazing people who are doing the work day in and day out to really show the American people that we care about you, that your lives matter to us. And there have been results. Look at what's happened during the first 2 years of the President Biden administration. Things like the Inflation Reduction Act, investing in climate change, investing in infrastructure, historic infrastructure bill, getting shots in arms, getting vaccines out there, eliminating student loan debt. So I think the executive branch is probably the best option we have right now, but it's a very concerning thing, because the core of democracy is that we have trust in our institutions. And the moment that we don't have trust in our institutions, like the Supreme Court, the judiciary branch, like the legislative branch, then democracy becomes so much easier to deteriorate. And I think it's upon all of us now. The only way is to elect better officials and elect people who actually care about our democracy. And so, this is an issue I'm sure that won't be the last of what we talk about in this show. And so we'll continue pulling that thread. But at least right now, I think the most trusted institution is the presidency, and all the other institutions give me a lot of concern and don't give me much hope. So, that's all the time that we have left today. Hopefully you have more questions burning. Be sure to submit them via Twitter or other ways of reaching me. You can submit them to ontheMove@politicon.com or tweet them to @VictorShe2020, and we'll be sure to get to them as soon as we can. We'll be back tomorrow with a new episode of On the Move with Victor Shi, with myself. I'll be joined by John Harwood, who was a former reporter at CNN, who was a former reporter at CNBC, has done a really wonderful job of really kind of building awareness about what journalists and media and what their role should be in this political environment. So John Harwood will be great. I know all of us have probably seen or read him or heard of him on Twitter or on CNN or on his other networks. So be sure to join us tomorrow. That's at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. Be sure to smash the like button. I see Suzanne, you in the comments saying that. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And I will see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Thursday.